All right, it is up, and I believe we are going live now. Hey, everybody, welcome to Fran and Friends podcast. Today, I have this special guest with me. It is Perry Sun from Perry Sun Coaching. And if you are a procrastinator, this is your podcast to watch. So, Perry, in her private coaching practice, she helps clients to get stuff done for things that they really want to do. And for those of you that may have been putting things in the back burner for things that you really want to get accomplished in your life, this is the lady that you want to have a conversation with. Perry's background, she's been in PR for 11 years, and she is recognized for working with brands like Olay Skincare,
All good.
Hennessy Cognac, Volkswagen Automobiles, Omega Watches, and I'm sure that there is a list on LinkedIn that she could give you guys. So, Perry, is there something that you would like to share with us as far as how you got into coaching?
Yeah, for sure. So, like you said, I was in public relations for 11 years, had what I like to affectionately call a mental breakdown in the middle of the pandemic, where I was like, is this what I want to be really doing with my life until I retire or until I die? And the answer was a hard no. And so I got into coaching, luckily, because the wife of one of my best friends, another coach named Christine Sachs, was like, I've always thought you had, some talent for coaching. Are you ready to try something new? And my answer was yes. And so went into a coaching training program called Accomplishment Coaching in 2021, graduated in 2022, got my credential from the International Coaching Federation last year, and have been practicing for the last 3 years, essentially. So fell into coaching that way. But, I think the answer to your question is got into coaching through a mentor. So I'm lucky that I have people in my life who want the best for me and want to support me and want to help me.
Awesome. That it's so interesting how the pandemic just created opportunities for people, right? To
Yes.
shift whatever that looked like for them. So I asked you, there are a few, I guess, distinct approaches or applications of what coaching is versus therapy versus consulting. Could
Yep.
you share with people what the differences are on those things?
Sure. And that is the first thing that I go through with any prospective client that comes to me. So we'll often have a sample session, and I make sure to get really clear on distinguishing between the different modalities. So
Okay.
therapy is very much a healing modality. And there are several places that we as coaches can't go simply because we haven't had the training for it. Examples include abuse and addiction. Those are places that I, as a coach, cannot go to. Now, there are plenty of coaches out there who have a therapy background, who are licensed clinical social workers. And so if you're looking for someone who marries both therapy and coaching, would definitely recommend that you Google search or ask around for recommendations for a coach who's got a therapy background.
Got
Now, consulting is a teaching dynamic. So it's very much, you go to a consultant, they're the expert, you have a question, you want to know how to get from point A to point B. The consultant lists out all the little steps that you have to take to get from point A to point B. As a coach, I'm more of a partner. I don't pretend to know anything about your life, to pretend to know anything about your goals. What it is very much, it's an equal partnership, and we use the future to plan the present and basically reverse engineer how to get to where you want to be. And to your point earlier, sorry, keep interrupting. I keep going. The most
I wanted to see if you can repeat that again a little bit more slowly.
Sure.
You use the present to plan the future?
Yep. You use the future to plan the present.
Use the future to plan the present.
Mhm.
Just really, what does that look like?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of a good example. every coach worth their salt will tell you that confidentiality is the most important thing. And so when I'm thinking of examples, I try really hard not to bring what my clients are working on and use that as an example. But I guess the easiest one that I can think of that would be applicable to nowadays is, we've heard in the last couple of years, and myself included, people want a career change. People want to do something different. Their jobs are no longer meaningful or fulfilling. They don't know what their purpose is. And so let's say you have the hard conversation with yourself and you do the deep introspective work and you realize that maybe you want to go from construction into tech. Let's just use that as an example. Cool. You want to get into tech. You don't know what job to look for. You don't know where to start, but you know you want to be in tech. So like we use that to basically backtrack and try to plan your present around that future. So then what do we do? From a coaching perspective, like, let's make sure tech is really, really where you want to be and that you want to go into it simply for salary. I want to make sure that, you know, you are going into it because this is something you're genuinely interested in. Let's have those deep introspective conversations together versus you doing it on your own and making sure it is what you really want. I think I remember there's this great clip that often circulates on Instagram and TikTok, but it's an interview between Trevor Noah and Oprah. And Trevor's like, how do you know, what to work towards or what the goal is? And Oprah's answer is, you gotta figure out what it is you really want. And most people have never considered what they really want. Oftentimes when we say we want things, they're like a means to an end. So it's like, I want to go into tech because the salary is great. And that way I will have enough money to travel the world, buy a new house, take care of my parents, whatever it is. Okay, but then you're using that tech job as a means to an end, right? If your goal is financial security, then that's what it is that you want, really.
Okay, but not really to be in the tech industry.
Yeah. So like you work with a coach who will hopefully ask those deep, insightful questions to really get at the root of the thing that you want.
At what point do people find themselves talking to you? I know you mentioned like there's a career transition. Are there other areas that they find themselves like, oh, okay, well, I really need to figure out what I'm going to do with my life, or I'm procrastinating here. I don't know why I'm not getting to this next plateau for whatever reason. Like, what are some of the main reasons? Maybe give us 3 main reasons people identify working with a coach, especially when they find themselves procrastinating, because we can put a label on that, right? But it could be various things that could be. And could you share what those are?
Yeah. So I think the most common one that I've seen or heard about is love. You know, they're maybe in a relationship that doesn't feel like it's supporting them or is the best for them. And it's like, how do you get out of that into something that actually they love the person, they want to be with that person versus being just comfortable in that relationship with that person. So I'd say that's one example. I think the other one, the career, is another common example. People, I would say it's a safe assumption to make, most people don't like change. And so any change is a really big obstacle for most people. And so when you're deciding to change careers, you know, that's not only a big leap, but it's a big leap, especially if you haven't taken the minute to figure out what it is that you really want. And then I think in the last thing across the board, I'd say in my own practice, it's the little projects that you said you wanted to get to. Like I have, you know, a client, without broaching confidentiality, who wants to be an adventurer. And so what is keeping that person from being an adventurer, from, you know, doing an Ironman, you know, triathlon, to skydiving, to traveling the world, to, you know, climbing the 7 peaks and all that stuff. And so, you know, you look at what gets in the way of that, and what it tends to be is we get bogged down in the day-to-day life stuff and just making it to the next day. And then all of a sudden, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of your life has gone by and you're like, wow, the things that I said I wanted to do
Right.
have been moved to the back burner.
So it's that rat race, and it sounds like we may be needing an opportunity to schedule time for ourselves, and it sounds like that's where you come in to help us. Like, you need to get rid of this, you need to get rid of that, and
I mean, getting rid of things could potentially be a tactic that we use, but
okay,
the conversations that I try to have with my clients, because of my coaching training, it's more about digging deeper and getting really clear on the thing that you want. And so it's like, I know that the rat race of everyday life is what's getting to you, but do you really want to be an adventurer? Like, or are you chasing after a specific feeling? And so it's having those
interesting.
deeper, introspective, asking the hard questions versus, being like, oh, okay, so I hear you. That's what you want. Let's like figure out how to get you there. I mean, people can come up with tactics and strategies all the time, but I think where maybe the most value is for a lot of coaching clients is taking the time to get really clear on what it is that you actually want.
Mm. So, what do you what does I guess how does that process work? What does that look like on getting clear? I know you mentioned a few things that you work with them as far as like the tactics and the approaches. Like, is there something specific that people should be looking for as to how to gain clarity for themselves?
Totally. I often share this resource, and I don't know if you've heard of this, but the book The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron.
Mm,
And
the
so it's
artist way.
The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. It is it's kind of self-helpy, but what I like to think of it as, the book and the author really force you to not only make time for yourself, but to prompt you with like questions to ask yourself to get to the root of what it is that you're looking to get out of your life. So
Mm,
it's not only spending the time to have that conversation, but it's being prompted with deep, hard-hitting questions that don't result in a yes or no answer, or is something that could be easily answered. So I really like The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. I think that's a great way to start if you want to try that on your own. As a coach, I've had the training, and so the goal for me is always to ask the slightly deeper question than you might normally get from friends or family or colleagues. I think the other thing that I've noticed a lot of is there's been a lot of media coverage about like hard hitting, like personal development questions that you can ask yourself. I
mm,
think The Cut actually had an article about this not too long ago, but it was like 65 like hard hitting questions to ask yourself if you want to get to know yourself better.
mm.
That sort of like flavor definitely, I think, could encourage deep introspective work on yourself. And so you can work with coach, you can look up these questions online. The internet is a wonderful resource.
Mm. I have a book. What do you call that? This one here is called Self Care Check In.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that really like helps me in clarifying, but it does help me to identify like what I'm thinking on the inside for self. And I know when I found myself looking for a life coach, it was really more because I was working on some emotional trauma stuff, trying to work through some somatic releases. Um, do people that experience trauma, I guess, what are some of the characteristics that you found, if you have found, that people find you? Like, are they going through that transition of like maybe going through a divorce, or like just different things like that?
Yeah. I would say based on my private practice, and again, I've had my private practice since 2021, so I've been at this for 3 years. My private practice isn't so much I've had this big life change and it's traumatizing and I need to work with a coach to get over it or work through it or, find solutions to figuring out the trauma. It hasn't been so much that. What I find is in my practice specifically, and I can't speak to everyone else's practice, in my practice, I've attracted a lot of highly motivated people who feel like they've hit a wall, so to speak. And so they are like looking for the next thing to give their, life some sort of purpose or meaning, other than being a great parent, being a great, spouse, being whatever it may be to them. And so they're finally, I think, ready and willing to do something for themselves rather than be constantly in service to others. And they're highly motivated. So you give them something and they like want to go work on it. They will take the quote unquote homework and they'll do it. And then we'll come back in our next session to see how much progress has been made. So with the traumatic stuff, I can't really speak to that only because my practice hasn't had very much exposure to that. But I would say if you are going through some sort of trauma, like a divorce, maybe working with a coach who's got a therapeutic background, is a licensed clinical social worker, I think bridging the gap there and finding the right resource for you is the most important thing. And I think that goes back to something I know you and I have talked about, but finding the right coach for you, I think, is the most important step. Like you wouldn't go with any coach,
Right.
that you find. And so finding the coach that not only is going to meet your needs, but I think the most important thing about working with a coach is chemistry. Do you feel like your coach is in your corner? Do you feel like your coach is a safe space for you to bring anything and everything to? Do you feel like you can trust your coach? And if any of those questions, if any of the answers to those questions is a no, not the right coach and you got to move on. And so chemistry is super, super important because I think chemistry also dictates trust and the potential to maximize the coaching client relationship.
No, I've totally had that experience. And yes, we have talked about that where I've worked with the coach and I thought, oh, okay, maybe the coach that I'm working with is like a bit strict in how they're approach. And oh my God, I think she was more triggering me than I was allowing myself to go through this process. And I thought because of the thought patterns that I had previously grew up with, it was just like, I think you need to quit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm glad I found you, Perry, because you helped me in transitioning with my book because that was something I wanted to get some speaking engagements, and then you really asked me some hard questions. Okay, Francis, what are you really looking for? And then because of your prompting in those deep questions, I ended up landing a project with the what do you call that? The San Bernardino high school district with the Pacific Islander Club. I know. Get it, Perry?
No, get it, Fran. No, the coach is merely a conduit to your greatness. I think I said this to you during, our one-on-one. If you feel okay with me sharing it,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Your power is your power, and working with the right coach is merely a conduit for you to access that power.
What are some of the like exciting moments that you've had as a coach? Like, yes, you're doing a great job. And what are some moments you're like,
Yeah.
can you push that to the side and keep moving?
Yeah, no, totally. Totally. I think the best moments for me as a coach, and this is going to sound really egotistical, is when your client shows up for a session and they're excited, they're, enthusiastic, and they tell you, wow, I feel like I have really made some progress in the things that we've talked about. Like for me, as someone who is always doing something, I love it when my clients show up and are like, I I feel like I've made some progress towards the goals that, we've outlined at the very beginning of the coaching engagement. And so for me, that's what excites me. Like helping my clients or partnering with my clients to make progress is one of the best parts of my job. And quite frankly, when they feel like they've made progress, it gives me meaning and purpose. Like I think
Yes.
this is what is the most fulfilling part of doing this type of work. And so that is the best part. I think the worst part is when life gets in the way. When your client shows up to a session and, something has happened, there's been a death in the family, or, they've lost their job or something of that sort, where it's like really traumatic, where they felt like they were making really good progress and life throws them a curveball, which quite often life does. And
Yes.
so that can, I think, take clients and uh, people out of making the progress, because it is a really big blow. And what I have learned there is, instead of working through it, lean into the emotions, like
Mhm.
feel everything, make sure that you don't turn off your emotions for the sake of making progress. Because if you turn off your emotions, they're just gonna get bottled up and grow in intensity, and then they're gonna implode out of you like a soda bottle, and it's not gonna be a pretty sight. And so, when clients have life get in the way of their goals, you've got to make sure that the client feels good and feels safe. And at that point, as a coach, what you do is you ask, do you have a therapist, someone who you can take this to from an emotional standpoint, to make sure that you're getting the support that you need. And that's why oftentimes a lot of clients will want to seek out, a coach who has that therapeutic background, so that they can get it all in one. But, sometimes a client will come to you and be like, I'm really saddened by this. And, I haven't been able to make progress on my coaching goals for 2 weeks. What do I do about it? And it's like, do you think it might be time for you to see a therapist? And from there, as a coach, I'll refer you to a therapist. I generally have a list of, personal recommendations. And it's all about empowering your client to get the help that they need.
I was going to ask you, what does leaning into those emotions look like, especially for somebody that may not have practiced feeling?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like to some people? Is that like falling into old behavior patterns? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, from a coaching perspective, it's crying because you feel like you need to cry.
Mm.
Like if you want to use our session to just cry and to vent, cool. Like I would much rather you do that with me, because hopefully I've created that safe space. And so if it's not with me, it's making sure that you have access to a space where you can do that with someone and talk through the emotions. I am also not the type of person to be like, okay, well, I get that you're feeling shitty, and I get that something bad has happened to you, but we're going to push that to the side. And like, I'm not a military drill sergeant. I have emotions too. Right? And like, I also deeply empathize when life gets in the way. When I did my coaching training program, my father had a stroke halfway through my training program. And
Yeah.
so I'm not a robot, and I don't hold my clients to a robotic standard.
Mm.
Like if you feel like shit, would it be helpful and supportive to you to talk it out with me?
Mm.
Would it be what does helpful and supportive look like to you from a coaching perspective that I can provide? If it's something that I can't provide, is it, a therapist that I can refer you to? Is it, helping you call around to local therapists in your area who will take your insurance, or maybe, floating it by people in my network who are open to taking pro bono clients? I think there are different ways for us to explore what that support and that help looks like. And it depends on each individual client. But I think leaning into your emotions and acknowledging that whatever the event has, whatever the impact the event has on you, just acknowledging that you are human and that you feel a certain way because shit has hit the fan, quite frankly.
And it just sounds like that you're holding space for us in that space until we identify which direction that we want to go.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, thank you for doing that, Perry, because I think some people are so regulated, right? With, okay, hey, I'm just here to help you do this. I don't really give a care about the other part of you.
Yeah. I mean, but we all feel emotions and we feel things, right? And
Right.
so I'm not going to be like, well, turn on the robotic side of you and push those emotions aside. I'm going to ask, how can I best support you through this? We can use our session to go wherever you want to go. But, the alternative is they may not want to use the session for that. I'm happy to postpone, I'm happy to reschedule. Like, life does get in the way, and I know that. But I think it would be a disservice to force someone to push those emotions aside simply for the sake of, meeting goals. Like, I'm not a corporation at the end of the day. Like, your humanity and your safety and your well-being is also equally as important as making progress on the goals that you envision for yourself.
Right, right. Take away all these labels of CEO, of VP of this, and we are all people at the end of the day. Um, Trying to, I guess, go for a goal or whatever it is. Hopefully, they're pursuing things that make them happy.
Mm-hmm.
So, you mentioned earlier that you, during the pandemic, that you had some people in your life that said, "Hey, Perry, this would be a beautiful transition for you to get into coaching." Like, were there other things prior to the transition into coaching and prior to COVID that um, made you a candidate? Like, were there like events that occurred that, like, oh yeah, maybe I could be a coach? Like, what were some of those key moments? Like, what were some of the what did that look like?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing in answering your question is there was a little seed of dissatisfaction as I was, climbing the PR ladder, so to speak, right? And so, like, you'd get promoted where you'd get to work on really big accounts and your responsibilities would increase. And you're like, wow, I should be excited about all these opportunities. And instead, I am, maybe focused on, that's so much more work, or, like, I am not excited about that at all. And so it's like, then when you start noticing those little bits of dissatisfaction, I think it then leads to a larger question of, is it me or is it the industry? Maybe it's both.
Mm,
Like, what do you want to do about it? I think is the biggest question from like a coaching perspective, because sure, it's one thing to notice that you're unhappy or dissatisfied with something. It's another thing to do something about it. And so I think the biggest factor in leading me to coaching is noticing that there was a general dissatisfaction with my life and my work up to that point.
mm,
And so that was part of it. I think the other thing too is, having very different people in my network and having friends who did different things. My best friend is a journalist, and he happens to be married to an executive leadership coach, and
mm,
so interacting with different people and different people who have different perspectives and can see different things to you. I think oftentimes as people, we are very perceptive of ourselves, or we like to think that we are. And in actuality, other people may see more of us than we can see of ourselves. And so my mentor now, Christine Sachs, she's married to my best friend, Tony. Christine had picked up on things that would make me a good coach. And she was like, you're great listener. And sometimes it's not about coming up with solutions, and it's just holding space for someone, just as you said.
mm, mm,
It's also, I think this ties back to what I had said earlier. It's not only about holding space for the emotion, but it's also like, what do you want to do about that? And like, can we use the emotions to harness that energy to drive you forward and to like help you achieve your goals? Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. And so I think the being able to listen and potentially being able to spot opportunities to get you to the next level could be helpful as a coach. And so I think the other thing, my second part answer to your question is having people who are in different spaces and not, we're not all coaches, we're not all, journalists, we're not all PR people. I think having people who work in different fields and having your best interests at heart and wanting to support you. I wouldn't have ever thought of being a coach as like a career pivot. I probably would have gone into marketing instead. And that would have just been very similar to PR. But I had someone in my network who was like, I think you might be good at coaching. Do you want to try something different? And being really open about that too. I find that sometimes too, when you have friends, sometimes they're afraid to be like, do you want to try something different? Or they're afraid to kind of like push you a little bit. And so I was really lucky to have someone in my network, a friend and now a mentor, to kind of push me a little bit out of my comfort zone, because coaching is very different than public relations.
That I was like, I can't imagine. I know people like to say that they love change, but I find that that's really more of a quote that people like to quote and not something that they like to do.
I mean, I think it depends on the change. Like, right, if you won $1 million, like that's a great change for you to adjust to. But I think change in general, because we are often so accustomed to our comfort zone and what our day-to-day looks like, that any change is a little bit scary for everyone. And so I think it depends on what the change is. And I also think just being honest with yourself, like change itself is a scary thing.
Totally. I'm just taking back and thinking about like when I started to have like a reframing mindset, especially around having dialogue with my children. And I thought one way, but until I started seeing like a therapy, started talking to coaches, I was like, oh, okay, well, dang, maybe my way of thinking isn't the best way. So you keeping things open, where you said that your network isn't just about PR people, it isn't just about coaches, like you had a big network that you could really lean into. So sometimes, like you said earlier, people can see uh, a larger portion of who we are than we can see ourselves. And we may need to sometimes borrow that, which I think for you as a coach, like how could people benefit from working with you when they are in this space of, I guess, transition?
Yeah. I think the immediate answer that comes to mind is, I don't have any benefit from you making a change or not making a change, right?
Yeah,
And so when you work with a coach and there is not an attachment or an investment that they can benefit from,
I
that
love
makes
that,
me a
Mary.
little more objective than, say, your friends, family, coworkers, grandparents, etc., right? Because if you make a change, I don't benefit, and I also don't, I'm not harmed by it either. But if you
Hmm.
don't make a change, I also don't benefit and I'm not harmed by it. And so working with a coach, I think the biggest benefit, and again, this is just my personal interpretation because I am a coach. I think working with a coach can provide that objective, safe space to use as a sounding board, where the person doesn't really benefit from you making that change or not. Sure. Do you pay a coach? Absolutely. There is that benefit. But I think we are all pretty good at discerning when someone wants you just simply for your money.
Right.
Right. And so, like, I think again, it goes back to finding the right coach for you. Do you feel like that person's in your corner? Do you feel like that person is going to champion you? Do you feel like that person's going to push you when you need to be pushed? And do you feel comfortable with that coach to bring the good and the bad and the ugly? And if any of those are a no, that's not the right coach for you. And so, with my clients, I know that they can bring the good, bad, and the ugly, but also, if they decide to change careers, I don't benefit from that. You might get a better salary. You might, get to move to someplace new and start a whole new life, but I don't benefit from that. I also don't get harmed by it either. And so I think one of the many benefits of working with a coach is having that objective, safe sounding board to run ideas by, and, not being worried, oh, am I going to piss my husband off? Or, oh, is my best friend going to be sad that I'm moving away? Or, whatever it may be. There's no personal impact on me based on your decisions.
I mean, that what you said just blew the hell out of my mind, Perry. Like, I don't benefit from you working with me. You don't benefit from me. Like, could you repeat that again? Because I was like, wait a minute, she doesn't benefit. I would benefit if I decided to change my life. I would.
Potentially.
Yeah. I mean, and it just brought me back to how powerful our decisions and our minds are should we decide to go in a certain direction. And I feel like coaches, they provide more of a propelling point to help us push ourselves more at a faster trajectory than we would with our own thinking at a particular point, because we get into these situations because of our current thinking and thought processes, but we cannot go out and create a different type of atmosphere or a different result if we don't have, or if we're not applying different types of thinking, or I guess different applications that would help us live a
Yeah.
more I guess a life that we would want to live.
Yeah. And sorry, my facial expressions are giving me away. I think
No, you're
it's
all good.
to elaborate on what you said. It's not just the mindset shift, but another benefit to working with a coach, quite frankly, is the accountability. I may not benefit from it, but if you tell me and you're adamant that what you want is the thing that you want, well, at every session, I'm going to ask you, what progress did you make to getting towards that goal? Right. And so, like, if you feel like you didn't make any progress, again, I don't benefit and I'm not harmed by it. But I'm also going to ask you the hard hitting question of, like, well, what progress have you made? You said you were going to do X, Y, and Z. You didn't do X, Y, and Z. How bad do you actually really want the thing? So I think the accountability factor is definitely part of it. To your point about the mindset shift and the different perspectives, again, I think it depends on what you're working on, and if there are other mindsets and other perspectives that would be beneficial to you. But I think part of the reason why it could be cool to work with a coach is that objective, I don't benefit and I don't get harmed by your decisions either way. Because if you think about it, as a coach, I'm removed from it. So, like,
Yeah.
you were to run this decision, or if you were to run, a goal by a husband, a friend, a parent, a child, they all have some sort of stake in that decision. They all have some sort of, they could impact potentially whether or not you pursue a goal, or whether or not you pursue, whatever it is that you want. And so, again, that I think that objectiveness can be of incredible value to coaching clients.
I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because whether they are emotionally invested in it or whether they're not, like a coach would be, it's really powerful, the impact of the conversations that we have with people, the relationships that we have with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do they say, that you are the average of the 5 people that you hang around? So having a good network and you not being the smartest person in the room would probably be beneficial.
Yeah. And also, right, I think the thing that people forget about the average of five people is that you can always add, or you can substitute the five people, right? And so like when you meet people who, who you think you can add value to your life, you can substitute and you can move people around, and you can adjust your exposure to those people as well. And it doesn't have to be five people, right? Like if, it's a six person, but you see that six person every single week, like most of my coaching clients do, like that can also be factored into the average. And, I think another thing about working with a coach that's great is like, uh, anyways, I insist on it, is like consistency. Like we don't meet whenever you're free. Like for me, working with my clients, it's, once a week, every week would be ideal. But, bi-weekly sessions is another option that, I've worked out with some of my clients. And it's that consistency. It's the consistency of having a partner, and it's the consistency of having a partner who will hold you accountable towards working towards your goals.
Well, thank you for doing that. I'm going to read out a few comments that I see from our social media. And if you want to add any thing to that, author Marie MJ said, good conversation. April said, happy Saturday. So did Sonia Leray. And she said, happy Saturday. And she said that Sonia said, chances are that if individuals are afraid of change, means they have started acknowledging things that aren't right within the sphere they are living in. And then she also said coaches are great for goals and accountability, whereas therapists work deeper on getting you to make lasting changes to behaviors that keep reoccurring, addressing life issues that keep sabotaging you.
Sonia, I agree. If it were up to me, everyone in this world would have a therapist and a coach. Like, I think it takes a village, right? And it's not just a village for children, it's a village for adults too. I work with a coach of my own. I see my own therapist. It never stops taking a village. So right there with you.
By the way, Sonia's also a life coach, a psychotherapist, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also she's a fashionista. I think y'all need to connect for real.
That would be great. That would be great. I'm always into meeting other coaches, and quite frankly, I reiterate what I just said a minute ago. It takes a village. I think if it were up to me, everyone would work with a coach and everyone would work with a therapist.
Oh, she's a fashion psychologist. My apologies.
Hey, if you look good, you feel good.
Oh, I'm saying, and I've had some of these one-on-one conversations with her too. So we're going to get into the next segment of our show, which we ask you like a round robin, where there's 3 questions just for people to get to know you a little bit more better.
Sure.
And I'm going to transition. All right. If anybody else has questions or comments that they want to ask Perry, please do so. She'll be on for the next 15 minutes. So the first one is, what did you want to be when you were a kid and why?
Dear God, I remember this very clearly. I wanted to be a teacher because when I was a kid, fun fact about me, I'm a first generation Chinese American here in the US, and my parents immigrated here in the 80s. And so my first language was not English. And so when I was enrolled into public school, I had a really wonderful teacher in the first grade, Mrs. Turner, who taught me English essentially. And so that had such an incredible impact on me. And I obviously still benefit from that to this day. As a kid, I wanted to grow up and be a teacher. And then it was kindly pointed out to me in a constructive way that I don't necessarily have the most patience, and that kids often are scared of me, I guess. I don't know why, but it was pointed out to me and I was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be a teacher then, because I don't necessarily have the most patience in the world. And I have made a kid cry on a train before, which I don't know how it happened. I was minding my own business. I don't know what I did, but if I make children cry, probably not the best idea to be a teacher.
Wow. I mean, at least that teacher had an impact on you
Yeah.
to at least pursue it, right?
Yeah. Shout out Mrs. Turner.
Okay, Mrs. Turner. All right. So your next question is, what's your most embarrassing memory?
My most embarrassing memory. My most embarrassing memory. I think I was 8 and did not have a great gauge of how much my bladder could hold. And so I was out with my parents and we were drinking and eating all day. And I hadn't realized how much I drank and ate all day. And so I was 8 and like you get the realization, uh-oh, I might poop my pants or pee my pants. And so at the time, it was more pee than it was poop. And so I remember being 8 and living in New York, like no, like if you pop a squat behind 2 cars, like everyone knows what you're doing, but no one cares to like report you because you're also 8 years old. So I remember being forced to pop a squat between 2 cars to like relieve my bladder, and I was so embarrassed. And to this day, as an adult, the impact of that memory is I go to the bathroom before I leave anywhere, like ever, because like I will never pee in public ever again. Like I just will not. So that is my most embarrassing memory. Holding onto a bumper of some random like
I
Toyota Camry and popping a squat, terrible, terrible,
I can
terrible.
relate. I've had one of those.
Yeah, yeah.
Your next question is, you said 88. Can you share your
Oh no. Fran, I don't know if you can hear me. There's like a lag in the video and the audio. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing this, but I am. So I did not catch that third question at all. Oh no, there she goes. And I'm on the live stream by myself. It's okay. I'm sure she'll come back. Either way, happy Saturday, everyone, to everyone who is watching. Yeah, hope you've got some amazing weather as I do currently in New York. I think it's cool, but still sunny out. Yeah. Yeah. Looks good. Hope Fran's okay. Let's see. Oh, so close.